think I've gotten her thinking about, what is it that you want specifically with respect to many different factors? What is it that you need? And understanding where, what you want might conflict with what he wants and where there might be common ground between both of you and all of that, because that's what that's what good mediation does. That's what good facilitated negotiation does. And it's a much more creative, generative way of resolving differences.
Hello and welcome to Stories Lived, Stories Told, a dialogue-driven podcast exploring how to create better social worlds through better communication. I'm Abby, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Susan Coleman as we take a communication perspective on collaborative hardball, a new negotiation for women. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we are making and how we are making it through our communication practices. This might be something you have never done before, and that's totally okay. It means we are seeing ourselves as active participants with choices about how we show up to each other. It is paying attention to patterns, context, stories, and relationships to better understand how meaning gets made. And it is embodying curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to co-create better social worlds together. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the idea is that by looking at communication instead of through it, in this conversation and in all that we do, we expand our collective imagination through both storytelling and story hearing, revealing new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Susan Coleman. Susan is the author of Collaborative Hardball and the host of the corresponding podcast. She has many, many years of experience and stories that we're going to hear about today around negotiation. And this conversation made so much sense to me to have through the lens of a communication perspective, because it is a perfect example of the choices we have in terms of what we make and what we want to make together, and how that influences these, grander ideas of what we hope to create together, how that would influence our turn-by-turn communication in any interaction. Something I would have you keep in mind as you listen through this conversation today is just this idea of what if. As we talk about the things, the realities, ideas, concepts that both of us have come to know as true through our own experiences, reflect for yourself, what if that was true for me? What if that is true for people, for life, for our social worlds? And go through that imaginative process with us and try to understand with us what this new negotiation that Susan's talking about, what that could make if it's true, if it's real, if it's, meaningful for each of us in our lives. In addition to that, something I hope you will also keep in mind during this conversation and beyond is that we have recently announced that the CMM Institute, in collaboration with the Birmingham Systemic Training Program in Birmingham, UK, will be hosting a conference together in June 2027 on the 17th and 18th. Right now, you can fill out our interest form to indicate if you're hoping to attend. And we'll keep you up to date if you fill that out with all the information for submitting for workshop proposals and when our registration and our website goes live, which will be in the coming weeks. So that is a really exciting opportunity for us to expand beyond these podcast conversations, expand beyond the webinars we're doing and all the videos we've made to actually join together in person. So I'm a part of planning that and putting it together, and I'm just so looking forward to that. And I hope you'll consider joining us if you are able, June 17th and 18th, 2027. So next summer in Birmingham, UK. You can find the link to the interest form in the show notes of this episode too, if you want to go ahead and fill that out. That would be really helpful to us. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind this idea of what if. And with that, with this great energy and excitement, let's jump into this conversation with Susan. Hi, Susan. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of Stories Lived, Stories Told. I'm really glad to have you here today.
Likewise, Abby. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm
Pleasure.
really, really glad to be following up with you because some context that I'll set is that we first met during an online version of the Do Power Differently course from the Omega Institute. And I just found that to be such a rich time. My listeners might remember that I already had Mill Leopold on the podcast, who is also someone that I met during the Do Power Differently conference and has a lot in common with you in terms of, I think, what you want for women in the world, and also particularly and interestingly, the connection that you've made between empowering women and reducing the negative effects of climate change as a very, very important and underutilized, kind of connection. So that's some context for me coming into this as well. And as I'm thinking about, I already shared with you that, I want us to start this conversation with what are we bringing with us into this conversation. I've been really reflecting on the week that I've had so far. And it just happens that I've had 3 different meetings with people who are brand new to what I do. And it's really interesting to pay attention to myself and how I change up how I talk about what I do based on the context. Obviously, like that's, not a bad thing, just a fact of I'm trying to pull out the pieces of this work and this practice that are most important to the given context I'm talking about. But the question that I think is over all of this is, what is the best invitation for people to, I'm making an assumption here, presumably begin to think about their communication differently? I'm assuming that most people don't think about their communication in the way that my work and the work of the people around me would ask us to, which is this, like, we call it this social construction lens, and your communication makes your social worlds. And so what choices do you have in your communication? So there's like this long line of, this train of thought you could follow to the end. And it's messy stuff and it's complex stuff because our communication is complex and our social worlds are complex. And so any kind of practice or framework around it, I think, is going to be equally complex to match that. I think that's important that, if we have simple ways of making sense in the world, then the world's gonna seem simple, or we're gonna make it simple, to fit those ways of making meaning in the world. So I just wonder if that's something that might resonate with you, as in your book, in your work in the world, you're talking about what you call the new negotiation. And I wonder if there's a similarity we share between, you could almost change out the word communication for negotiation. How do you invite people to see the negotiation, to see their life in terms of negotiation, see their communication in terms of negotiation, and then to, empower and equip them with the tools to do that better? So so many things I'm throwing at you for how I'm arriving here today. But before we dive too deeply into any of it, Susan, I just want to know, how are you arriving to this space today? What are you bringing with you?
Well, I am arriving I would say that I'm not that far away ever from tears. Not all the time, but I am these days.
Interesting.
And where I am sitting is 50 miles north of New York City in the Hudson Valley. 15,000 years ago, this, where I'm sitting, was under a mile-high sheet of ice. And 12,000 years ago, that ice started to recede and human beings started to live here. And I go there because I've been very acutely aware of where I am on this planet. And I guess that's why it's tears are so close to me, because things are so iffy. Things are so iffy. It feels, on the one hand, I feel tremendous, like, increasing excitement that the process of regeneration, of humans figuring out how to learn with each other, live with each other, so that we don't ruin this extremely magical place that we call home. And then the awareness that I don't know, it feels like a race of time, maybe. The clock is ticking, who's doing what. Feels like that with our election, but it feels like that on the bigger scale with what I would call a patriarchal world culture that is on the decline, going away, but is also still trying to grab, and or a power over paradigm that is still trying to grab, and even to the point of ridiculousness, like, okay, we don't need this planet, we're just going to extract as much as we want from it and then go off to Mars. Like,
Right.
you go for it, boys, you go, you do that, and that's fine. But it just feels ridiculous to me, honestly. It feels like, okay, do they really know?
Mhm.
Do they really want to live on Mars? I don't know. I don't know. So that's, I mean, I guess that's when I think about, there's a lot more that I could say
Sure.
about where I have come to understand about where I'm currently sitting, and all the complexity, because in some ways where I'm sitting, even to the point of there are these two glacial erratics, big boulders that are right to behind, one's over there and one's over there, and they were left behind from the glaciers, as are many other things that are telling the story of how humans came to be here, indigenous folks, then colonists, and all that unfolded. Yeah, the whole story, which I could say more about.
Yeah, I really appreciate you zooming us way out, because we do carry those contexts with us, even if when people say, how are you doing? What are you bringing with you? What's going on in your world? But we're maybe not inclined to go that far out and name those things. But I think it would really benefit us if we did. So I really appreciate you starting that way, because you are bringing that with you.
Well, let me say, Abby, if I could just say, and the other thing is that, I'm a mom, and I have two beautiful humans that I'm a mom to. I mean, they are adults. And when I loved being a mom, I loved birthing those children. And I did it with, I felt like I was so part of that process. I was really blessed to have a whole natural childbirth process and wonderful midwives, blah, blah, blah. I spent a lot of time focusing on taking really good care of those children, only to be now sometimes some people might call me a senior citizen. Sometimes some people might call me a wise woman, whatever. But feeling like I'm leaving, and I'm not leaving the planet, but feeling like I'm looking at when I leave the planet, and feeling really alarmed at the state of the planet that I'm leaving to my kids, and by definition, all of our children. And I honestly, I feel, as you can see, I mean, close to tears, but also very angry about it too.
Yes.
Very angry, and very, lots of feelings, as I think many of us have lots of feelings about it, lots of feelings. But it's never very far from my awareness, because I feel like it is the biggest thing. And I think there's a lot of fake news, a lot of denial, a lot of trying to cover it up. And then of course a lot of people are just trying to survive. They can't really be thinking about this climate. Are we near climate collapse? Are we near nuclear annihilation? They can't really be thinking about those things. But I have, I guess, the privilege, maybe, to be thinking about them. I don't know.
I think that's a great way to put it. That makes a lot of sense, and it kind of gives me an interesting jumping off point to ask you to further, introduce yourself, in terms of, there's a million ways I could ask this question. Just most broadly, Susan, who are you? But also particularly in the frame you've offered, like, what has your life been? What are the stories and experiences you had that have led you to be someone that has the privilege and the desire to look at the things you're looking at, to do the work you do?
Well, I could go in any number of different directions, but I will say that question of who am I has been a question that actually I start my book that way. And I've used the question, who am I, what do I want, and how am I going to get it, as sort of three orienting questions I've used with myself and with my clients, my organizational clients, over the years. This, I will say, I mean, this sounds kind of, might sound pretentious or corny, or I don't know. But to be honest, to answer that question really honestly, right now, as I sit in this chair, I would say that I am a goddess. And I say that because not in any way to communicate that I'm better than anybody else. I don't mean it in that sense. I just mean that I am claiming the divinity that I think was taken from me by the culture that we live in. And it's the feeling that I want for all women, all people, but all women particularly, to really own it. Because what it means when I say I'm a goddess, it means that I am connecting to my indigeneity from long ago. I am connecting to a world that was before patriarchy took over, whatever, 8,000 years ago, whatever we want to say.
Yeah.
I am connecting to the earth, and I'm not looking up into the sky. I think it's a very profound, I think Gloria Steinem said something like, it's a very profound message that children get, that God is a man. And, whatever your religious traditions are, so many people get that message that it's a male kind of concept. And I really, I was so moved. I worked for NASA for years and years and other space agencies. I was teaching them international negotiation. And so I was really gripped by the whole Artemis thing just recently. And the photos coming back again. I mean, as you can see, I had the Apollo photo. I've had that for a long time because I think it provides so much perspective about our collective situation and blessing. But I think this time, what really struck me looking at the planet and thinking about Gaia, this living, breathing being that we're all part of, was that I really, it birthed me. I mean, I had this, because I birthed 2 children and I know what that feels like. And it just suddenly dawned on me, wow, this planet actually birthed me. This mother goddess planet birthed me, created me. I am part of this whole planet. I'm part of life. And, I'm not above it. I'm not separate from it. I am it. A very important part of it, some would say a keystone species, very important to how we move forward in our relationship to the planet and to all life on Earth. So anyway, I think of myself as a goddess. I do. I mean, almost every morning I put my feet on the floor and I say, I just repeat, I'm a goddess. It has transformed me. It sounds corny, but I don't know. It feels important to the divinity. And I do. It's a wish that I have for all women who choose to feel that way. I already said I'm a mom. I love the fact that I can claim author. That's fun. That I wrote this book. I love to write. I'm a speaker. I think I've been, from the age of 12 or 10, somebody who has been concerned about a more peaceful planet. I was born in the 1950s, and I was very influenced by the Vietnam War, or the American War, as I like to call it. Very influenced by then U.S. imperialism in Latin America, and very influenced by movements of domination, and how much also my family, which is one of the oldest colonial families in the United States, right from the very beginning, both Dutch and British, So in that sense, I'm not relating to my indigeneity. That goes back to Celtic, whatever. But in this context,
Yeah.
I definitely am a descendant of the early colonists in the United States, and I think as I became aware of that, none of us have any say over the circumstances we get born into, but as I became more aware of the circumstances I was born into, both particularly the economic privilege. Initially, I beat myself up a lot about it, but I also feel very good about the fact that right from the moment I started becoming aware of social hierarchies and that I took good action. I feel like I have taken steady action towards a different kind of world order that is more democratic. And yeah, so I don't know, that's something about who I am, I guess.
Yeah, it is. I so appreciate you starting that way. And I'm realizing that as you name, I'm a goddess, and talking about what I would call, based on what a favorite author and podcaster of mine, Glennon Doyle, would call like your knowing, that inside. I think divinity is maybe, the connection I could draw between what she talks about and what you talk about. I'm going back to this experience in my mind that, like you named a couple moments I can picture so clearly, of I'm living back at home with my parents during COVID because I was at college. And so I had to go home, and I'm doing a virtual yoga class with my mom. We're in the living room on our little yoga mats. And it's the beginning of the class. We're laying there, and the woman is reading through this meditation as we're just kind of, dropping in. And she offers this Lao Tzu quote that I had never heard before, which is, I'm going to try to make sure I get this right. At the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want. And for some reason, just where I was in my life in that moment, that struck me so much that I was like, I got to get up off my mat and write that down before I forget it, because I could just in that moment be like, that really means something to me. And a story I have around that I could connect that to is something I believe that I could correctly, at least partially contribute to or attribute to the fact of being a woman, being raised as a girl, that I learned how to be so much more in touch with other people and I don't know if it was their knowings, but their opinions, at least, their feelings, their preferences, and to sacrifice my own knowing. And so I think that one quote it's just, and that's what communication and stories are all about. That I think that's why we talk to each other. To put it very simply, like when I hear that, I start to go through the process of like, what if that was true? Like, what if I believed that? Then what kind of person could I be? What kind of world could what would have to be true about the world and other people if that's true for me and all of us? And I just think that means so much to me and has been a big part of my ongoing evolution, and is woven right in there with the learning I've done around a communication perspective, in terms of, if you want to be truly like embodied in a kind of communication that is mindful and is compassionate and is curious, then I think there's a seed of that could go back to that, who you are. And you have the answer and it's at the center of your being. Like you're saying, it's not some distant someone up in the sky. It's in you. And I just think that's a really, really beautiful thing to think about. Like, yeah, these moments that, lead us down the paths that we're on.
And I feel like it's almost weird. When I was 12 or whatever age I was, I read All Quiet on the Western Front, which was about World War I.
Yeah.
And that book really gripped me.
Yeah.
And I traced my peace builder self to that moment. I'm sure, I don't know the weather probably, but that one I remember thinking consciously, this is not okay.
Yeah.
This is not okay. And I'm going to use myself to make it different. I don't know, whatever my 12-year-old self or 10-year-old self was thinking at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I always try to avoid the like everything happens for a reason platitude because that never feels helpful in the moment of
Mm,
something. But I think there's why people say it is that there is a truth to it. I think each of, again, I never want to project that on people, especially if they're going
mm,
through something hard. But I think each of us is allowed to look back on our lives and say, A caused B, or, I am who I am because of these experiences. And that makes me, again, just as an interesting segue into talking about your book, Collaborative Hardball,
mhm,
your podcast that goes along with it. All, maybe we can zoom out too and talk about all the work you do, but I'm
mm,
interested to hear about like the specifics of
mm.
this book. I wonder about what are the things that happened that led you to writing this book, maybe going back to like what led you to the world of negotiation in the first place,
Mm,
and how just maybe there's some stories, maybe there's some experiences you could pinpoint to help
mm,
like catch us up on what's your story been around
mm,
this work around
mm,
negotiation.
mm. Well, yeah, that's a good question. So I guess I would trace it to becoming a litigator.
Mm,
And I did that, I suppose, because I did come from a very gendered upbringing. And my father was a Wall Street lawyer, and my mom was a homemaker, but also, I will say, very active in a lot of social justice issues in her life as a homemaker or volunteer.
mhm,
And I mean, it became apparent to me at some point when I was in, I think where I went to this high school and then in college, I just suddenly became much more aware of the way I was socially disenfranchised,
mm,
and I wanted power. I wanted more power. And my definition of power at the time was, oh, well, I'll become a lawyer. And that's what I did. I saw my father was a lawyer. When
yeah, yeah.
he put on his suit, he went to Wall Street every day. I was like, okay. And he
No
had,
great mystery about where that connection
yeah,
comes from for you.
yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And, and then I did that. I mean, I did that that's a whole long story of going to law school. I mean, whatever. I mean, I had the story before law school. I had done some really great social justice work, but I won't, in terms of the book and negotiation, I'll respond to that. I did litigation, and
Mhm.
it was ridiculous to me, honestly. I mean, I just thought the whole process was and I described this in the book, but the law firm that I worked at was a spin-off of these big Wall Street firms, and there were a lot of they were lovely, lovely people there, but it was very intense, and they expected
Yeah.
us to work until 10 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
and they also, I think, I got hired there. um, I mean, I did, I was on the law review and whatever I did, but I got hired there also because I was a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I didn't realize this at the time.
Hmm.
And I had no idea that there was this kind of conflict going on inside this law firm between the Jews and the WASPs. And
Hmm.
the Jews were called the Bagel Boys by the WASPs. And, so I go in and I immediately befriend all the Jews because that's typical, whatever. I don't know. I just liked them. Whatever. I like them better. They didn't, they probably didn't have the same sense of entitlement or domination that
I
I
see.
think my background uh, had. And
Hmm.
anyway, we did everything you do in a commercial litigation firm. We were, um, oh God, some of it was. I represented the Republic of Palau. I did a lot of work for Sprint Media. I did a lot of work for John Hancock and stuff like that. And but the long and the short of it is that I thought the process was often stupid.
Mm.
A lot more, and I maybe now I have more respect for it because one of the things that happened since Trump came into office is that, when you talk about negotiation and conflict, you can talk about resolving conflict at the level of needs and interests, which is where I like
Mhm.
to do it. That's
Mhm.
about negotiation and a lot of the large group processes I've done and stuff like that. You can talk about resolving conflict at the level of rights and rules and regulations, or you can talk about resolving conflict at the level of power.
Mhm.
And so just in that sense, Trump came in and all he was about, all he's been about is domination and power over. I mean, he's like the maybe he's done us all a favor because he's so much the embodiment of that kind of the toxic masculinity that I think is really, I mean, he's almost funny. He's such a character. It's not funny, but it's almost
Like caricature. I see what you're
he's
saying.
such a
Yeah.
caricature.
Yeah.
And so but then I was there. I thought I cannot imagine resolving our differences this way. It would be one angry letter after. This is when I'm back at the firm. One angry letter after another angry letter. Attack, 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 and so I knew this was not for me. I also knew that I wanted to be a mom at that point, and the lifestyle was like not going to work. I was working until 10 o'clock every night, and I'm also interested in like I don't know. I'm interested in diversity and good and human relationships that are respectful and whatever. Anyway, I left and I went to the Kennedy School at Harvard, and it was right at the ground floor of getting to yes, negotiating agreement without giving in was being birthed there. It had been 5 years earlier, I think. So I immediately, because I'd been focusing on international development in my undergraduate, but I got just drawn into that world very quickly because it combined process, psychology, uh, international relations. I mean, I don't know, all of it was kind of in that world. And so I just feel very grateful to the program on negotiation in terms of having created that. I think Roger Fisher and William Ury and actually, maybe I don't know. This is a story I never tell, but somehow I'm feeling like it's kind of funny to tell you. So the book is called Getting to Yes, right?
Right.
Well, I actually was a friend of Roger Fisher was the author of that book. He was a professor at Harvard Law School, and his son Peter Fisher was a friend of mine in high school, and I went to his house with my boyfriend. I think in Martha's Vineyard, and I was 19, and I got to yes for the first time with my boyfriend at Roger Fisher's house, and I always thought, oh, well, then it was just meant to be that I was supposed to be in this world. It was a wonderful experience, I'm glad to say. I know many women do not have a great first experience, but my experience was wonderful. It was not with not with Roger Fisher's son. It was with my boyfriend, my boyfriend. But anyway, a funny aside that I sometimes laugh about,
Yeah, things come together in that way.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I got really taken by negotiation. I did. Yeah. Well, I won this negotiation prize. I was doing a lot of simulations, and then I left there and I said, I'm going to focus on intercultural negotiation. And the folks there said, oh, there's no such thing. Which I kind of just knew that, and in fact, I've proven them wrong. Over time, they've done a lot more stuff with culture, but it was really where my focus was. I came to New York City. I met
What did they mean by that? There's
no such thing. I think they thought that because there was an argument to be said that global corporations were transcending cultural differences and creating a large, dominant global culture.
Interesting.
Which had some truth in it.
Yeah.
But I think that's what they were reflecting back to me, but I wasn't having it at the time. And I came to New York, came back from Cambridge, went to New York, met Ellen Rader, who became my business partner, who'd been doing intercultural negotiation training around the world for many years. And we became like, I don't know, it was a really wonderful partnership that went on for years and years and years and helped launch a lot of people in the field of what I'd consider intercultural negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
We created something at Columbia University, and then I did this whole thing at the United Nations for years, training basically their staff in all duty stations in intercultural negotiation, intercultural collaborative negotiation, and mediation. I also was doing mediation. I was doing, which I think of as facilitated negotiation. And so that went on for years and years until it didn't anymore, and then I moved on to another chapter. But I think that answers your question.
Hey, it's Abby here, taking a pause in this conversation to invite you to reflect with me about how this episode is hitting you so far. If you're wanting to learn more about the coordinated management of meaning theory that I reference in this conversation, I'd recommend checking out the CMM Institute Substack for additional educational resources. If you're loving what you're hearing and are curious to learn more about CMM in different contexts, use the link in the show notes to follow the CMM Institute event page, where you can stay up to date with our monthly webinars hosted by yours truly. These events are an opportunity to gather with our community and explore CMM in different ways. And if you're looking to be even more connected, you can peruse our other CMM Institute initiatives, like our free social emotional learning resources, Cosmo Activities, which feature ways to engage all ages in conversations about building better social worlds. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes. As we turn toward the second half of this episode, I invite you to reconnect with your body and your environment. As the music plays to take us back to the conversation, take a breath, sink into your body wherever you are, take in your surroundings, and settle in for some more stories. Let's get back into it.
I mean, I could say then moving forward and fast forward, why collaborative hardball? I mean, collaborative hardball, the way I define that is, I mean, the title of the book is Collaborative Hardball, Using the Power of a New Negotiation as Women to Change the World. And I think I define collaborative hardball as kind of the counterforce to patriarchy. And I called it that because, when at my intro podcast, I created this thing where I got all these women that I know around the world with different accents to, I think the script goes like this: collaborative hardball. We are building a more peaceful, sustainable, and gender equal world, one negotiation at a time, at home, at work, and at the global peace table. And we are not taking no for an answer. That feminine is rising, and we are not going back. That's my episode one, my intro.
Yeah.
But I think it captures what I meant by collaborative hardball, is that I felt like in some ways, even the way negotiation is taught negotiation is often thought of so limitedly. It's thought of as about money and business, and I define it way more broadly than that. I mean, I think really, if you look at the world, and it's a problem in terms of making sure that women particularly read the book, because so many women say, I don't have anything to do with negotiation. I don't see myself inside negotiation. But there's been a huge negotiation going on between the genders for thousands of years, and it's so I want people to think about the process, because it's really like, when there's a conflict, what's the best process to resolve it? Well, the best process, a friend of mine the other day is going through a separation, a personal separation. And, she's from the United States, and her knee jerk, she's not this way. She's a yoga teacher, actually. But is to, what, should I hire a lawyer? And so we were hanging out. And of course I was like, moving her to, well, what do you want? What do you want? You know, what are your, and can you stand, and what do you need? And what does he want and what does he need? And, and it doesn't, yes, it's always good to know what your legal rights are, always
Yes.
useful as a backdrop. But the minute you go to a rights-based conversation, the minute you go there, you are in a much more adversarial place. And, the minute, if she were to immediately go to, well, I consulted with a lawyer and this is what the law says about what I'm entitled to, given that we've lived together for
Right.
15 years, she is immediately going to trigger a very different kind of climate in the conversation.
Yes.
And instead, I think I've gotten her thinking about, what is it that you want specifically with respect to many different factors? What is it that you need? And understanding where, what you want might conflict with what he wants, and where there might be common ground between both of you, and all of that, because that's what that's what good mediation does. That's what good facilitated negotiation does. And it's a much more creative, generative way of resolving differences than litigation, which is very binary. It's very win-lose. And I guess I was starting to say that since Trump got elected, I actually am much more appreciative of our system of rules and laws. I really feel like it's great that we do have, and we need to do a lot more work around it. But I feel like, you definitely, we used to be the divine right of kings. I don't like what you do, I'm going to cut your head off. Well, that's kind of where Trump wants us to take us back, into this divine right of kings. If I don't like what you do, I'm putting you in a nice facility,
Yeah.
No, instead we are supposedly the United States of America, and many countries of the world have a nation of laws and rules, which make us all feel hopefully safe. Now, of course, rules are just negotiated agreements.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's what they are. They're reified. I like to call them, they're reified negotiations. They're kind of like people had differences and then they made it into a law. And so some of the laws are great. Like, the Declaration of Independence is, it's not a law, it's actually, but the Bill of Rights are great. And then there's some rules that are obviously, there's something like the doctrine of discovery, which is just unbelievable that I don't know if you know what it is, but it's like leftover from the 1500s. And believe it or not, it is still, and I don't have direct support for this, but I have been told that this is true. And I, haven't gone back into law books to see, but it is still referred to as active law in both Canada and the United States. But basically it was a papal decree in the 1500s that that everything that was discovered in the New World belonged to the Pope, and every person that was discovered would be a slave to the Pope, and all property, all being, all land, everything. It is actually, I have it right here. It's just so astounding. European explorers who come upon, this is the actual doctrine, 1452. European explorers who come upon inhabited lands are instructed by the Pope to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all pagans whatsoever, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. These explorers must appropriate and give to the Pope and his successors all of the inhabitants, slaves, kingdoms, counties, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert these pagans to his use and profit.
That's tough.
Right? It says a lot about what happened in both of all of the Americas.
Yes.
And, Cortez to what happened in this country, and And it's also saying a lot about now, some of the new pope. I'm not a Catholic. I'm not a big fan of a lot of the church. I'm much more of a goddess, a pagan, whatever. But I do really appreciate this new pope is like he's doing some cool shit, and I mean he's apologized for slavery and he's but you take the Catholic Church and you also take the Church of England and these large institutions that were involved with like so much domination around our planet. And I think, wow, like imagine as they start unbundling their domination, because at the end of the day, this power over paradigm, if you ask me, is the fundamental problem. And I feel like it's the fundamental problem in speech, communication, laws, society, global negotiation, and we need to move beyond it. And I know that's a big statement, but I feel like that's what we need to do because it is at the heart of our climate crisis. It is at the heart of our climate crisis. This idea, that the Bible gave us the right to extract and dominate and,
I just am, you're seeing me over here nodding, vigorously to everything you're saying, because there's a world in which like you and I are talking about the exact same thing. Like in your book, there's you're introducing like what is negotiation. I think we're even just in the introduction, which I had already folded down every single page. I think by the time I was just through the introduction, as I said to you, there's obviously a lot here that I wanted to talk about. And you had this blank that was communication or negotiation is blank, and I wrote in it, I marked up your book, sorry, I wrote negotiation is communication. Like that's we talk about, the word we use a lot is like coordination. Like communication is about coordinating together about the meanings that we're making.
I might add one thing about it. It is communication, but I think it also has an element of conflict in it, because if there's no conflict, you don't really need to negotiate. You're just talking about something like, oh, the orange juice is over there. Yeah, can you get it for me when you go to the grocery store?
Yes.
I mean, that's sort of but it's only becomes a negotiation is like, I really don't want to do that. I have other things to do. Then it suddenly becomes a negotiation.
Yes, and I would add to your addition that communication, to me, I'm talking less about like what is being said and more what is going on. Because, and this goes back to what I was kind of introducing when I'm, talking about how I'm arriving and what's on my mind, is that this like different way of looking at communication that I'm talking about is saying we're taking for granted that something's being made in communication. We're taking for granted that we all share the same meaning, or that meaning is innate. And that's another theme I'm seeing, come up through the story you're telling of, it's so valuable for us to be reminded that what things mean is something that is created relationally and culturally. And so we can hold them a little more loosely. If we're saying, oh, well, negotiation is power over, I could see people like feeling, or patriarchal systems is the way things have always been, which is, I know is false, but I think is an argument like people make, like, well, it is the way it is because it is the way it is. And not offering a curiosity to how things were imagined once, because they've been passed down for so long that we forget that they were originally imagined by someone. And so I think, really have to claim that like work of reimagining. And that comes down to the communication of it all. And I won't just say negotiation is communication. Maybe the reverse is what I really want to say. Communication. What did I just say? I'm getting lost in my words. Maybe what I really want to say is communication is negotiation, because even if what you're talking about, what you're communicating about, is not in and of itself a negotiation based on the topic, the act of communicating, the relating, the back and forth, the turn by turn, I'm responding to you, you're responding to me, that is always a negotiation. Or if you wanted to, use the language we use, a coordination. Because, again, there's just so many parallels I'm hearing in what you're saying as far as that question you're asking of like, you named these different levels. We can have a conversation at the power over level. We can have a conversation at the rights level. We can have a conversation at the interest level. The question from like my world of things that mirrors that is this question of what are we making? To again say, we are making something in our communication, in the process of communication. Again, not just what was said.
Well, part of the thing about power over communication is that there isn't, you just do what I say. That's the whole point. I don't really have to have a further conversation with you. You just
and
do what
that's
I say and shut up.
a choice that could be made, what someone might want to make if they are in a, one-up position. Not that they should. So that brings me to this other point that I made a note to myself of going through your book of, again, just like equating this kind of way I talk about coordination with the way you're talking about negotiation, that like, it's just interesting when I'm saying, oh, communication is about coordinating. I think sometimes people, they have some connotations they're adding in, which is maybe they hear me say, we're talking about coordinating well or good coordination. But I'm just talking about coordination, which is just so kind of this difference between like, there's ways to coordinate well with each other. But outside of that, in a more neutral way, we're also just always coordinating with each other. And again, I see that parallel for negotiation that I saw it articulate, read it articulate in your book, have heard you talk about it in this way. And I wonder if you'd say more here as I'm making this connection that we're negotiating. And so negotiation doesn't always mean good negotiation or generative negotiation or fruitful negotiation, but there's these layers. So I'll just kind of pause there and wonder if you have anything to say about that.
Well, it is part of what I hope that people will take from my book is to understand what I think of as good negotiation. I really do map it out, particularly, when I talk about a new negotiation, I really am articulating what is the kind of negotiation. I honestly feel like one of the things that needs to happen on the planet, it's a big thing, but empowering women through the process of negotiation is a big game changer everywhere. And so to truly understand what good negotiation looks like as women shifts the balance of power on the planet in ways that I think will create a much more peaceful, sustainable world. Because I think as a group, and of course there are many exceptions to this, but as a group, we have been acculturated to be more accommodating, deferential. We have lived in a world where, patriarchy what does Carol Gilligan say about, she's a theorist at Harvard, patriarchy creates violence in men and silence in women, and as a big global pattern. And as a big global pattern, I think the women who do not feel like we have access to power, there's some that do, but the ones that don't we've gotten very good at deferring or manipulating or being confluent with or following the lead of the male authority. And when that changes, which I think it is changing, and I think men want it to change too. I mean, honestly, patriarchy is a bad deal for men. I think it's not, it definitely is a thing where, yes, it's the rule of the father, power over, men are on the top, but most men are not on the top. Most men, mostly what patriarchy does to men is it says, we're gonna acculturate you to use you to go off and get killed, to be soldiers or, it's, anyway, I don't know if I'm getting off the
think we're
topic
still
of
with
what you're
it. I followed
asking me,
you.
but
What I'm wondering too, and this is just, speaks to my practice. I'm trying to do this in my podcast more because the whole thing, argument I'm making is that we're taking meaning for granted. And so I think we've been talking around it, but I don't want to take for granted that it's clear to people, or even that you and I mean the same thing, even having read your book. And because you use the language of new negotiation. And so I wonder if you could say more about what you mean by that,
Yeah, yeah, I
What
will. I'd
is
love to do
new
that. Yeah,
negotiation?
yeah, yeah.
Is new negotiation collaborative hardball? And what kind of what are you juxtaposing it against in terms of what's new negotiation versus negotiation?
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's my definition of a new negotiation. It's where women are firm, fierce, fair, and unapologetic
Mhm.
in our sovereignty, free, not codependent, not owned, speaking the language of needs. I'm going to read the whole thing and then I'll come
Yeah, do
back and
it,
talk
please,
about
please.
it. Speaking the language of needs, honoring our emotional intelligence, transcending tribalism, and supporting a global sisterhood, balancing the feminine and masculine, and renouncing the toxic extremes of both, developing strong walkaway alternatives, saying a collective no to violence and dominion, thinking systemically from the intimate to the global and in alignment with nature, and working to manifest a deeper, more true global democracy. So that's a lot,
Hmm.
but I will just say, maybe I'll say some things about each of them: firm, fierce, fair, and unapologetic in our sovereignty. I think a lot of I know my sister would have said she was such a good she self-described codependent. I mean,
Mm.
codependence is like sort of this, if patriarchy is the largest superpower on the planet, which Emma Watson said,
Yeah.
I think codependency is its corollary.
Hmm.
It's a but my sister kind of, she wouldn't mind me saying this, but just felt like she was just constantly apologizing for her life, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of women might relate to that. I mean, it's you know and so in our sovereignty is a
Yeah.
big deal. It's a
Yeah.
big deal. Not being owned for so, I mean, what's amazing to me actually in terms of thinking about where I'm sitting on the planet, and again my art, what I'm calling an origin story, is when the glaciers receded, humans came here, and they were later named by the Dutch and the British as Wappinger. Now, I don't know what they call themselves. Sorry to say, but I don't. And they were matrilineal, and they were complementary. I think men and women were complementary. But what struck me when I thought then about fast forward to the colonization at
Hmm.
about 500 400 years ago, whatever it was, is the colonists brought a patriarchal way of doing things with them.
Hmm.
That was not the
Right.
norm in the indigenous world, in that indigenous world. I'm not a scholar, and I could not, I mean, I think in a lot of indigenous cultures it's not the norm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gender equality, and so it's just funny for me to think about how where I live in colonial America, I had less, as a woman, less power, less sovereignty than my indigenous counterparts. Now that changed over time. But, like, for instance, I could not own a house. This house that I live in here, I own it. I mean, I bought it with my husband at the time, but then we got divorced, and now I own it outright. And I think, yeah, I could not own a house outright without my husband until I think something like 1850 in Seneca Falls. I could not have credit. I could not have a mortgage.
Hmm.
I could not manage money on my own behalf. I mean, there really was. It's just so much of that. I like to say, follow the money. But if
Yeah.
you're talking about sovereignty, I think one of the things that I'm really hoping that women get our act together about is money.
Hmm.
And I'm not interested in us all becoming billionaires, because I think we got a real billionaire problem on the planet. But I do think that the more we have the money that we need,
Hmm.
we have better walkaway alternatives. You can't, if you're dependent, you can't walk away. And if you can't walk away, you can't negotiate. That's the
Hmm.
bottom line. And so being in our sovereignty means that um, we have some control over our lives.
Yeah.
And, it's, so that's the sovereignty. I mean, there's a lot of aspects of that sovereignty, and
Yeah.
it's the same as free, not codependent, not owned. I think people that are codependent are forever managing the person that they think of who has the power. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
can't believe all these blonde women that are in the Trump administration. I think like this is a new meaning of codependency. The way, I
Interesting.
mean, the way they're enabling him, or now of course they're all getting fired.
Mm-hmm.
but
Yes.
but it's like, and I mean the truth be told, to all of us as women, if we wanted to end patriarchy, we could do it. If women wanted this done, we could do it. But there are many that are still facilitating this idea
Mm-hmm.
of men, the male being protecting us and making money for us, and it's understandable. But it, but it also has, um, it can be really problematic if the guy is abusive. I mean, for many reasons that I think people know. If the guy is abusive, if you want access to your children, I mean, so many.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then I want to just speak to this new negotiation. I think speaking the language of needs is very different than speaking the language of positions and rights and
Right.
rules
Right.
and power. And I don't mean not being powerful. I don't mean that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you speak the language of needs,
Yeah.
and this is maybe a longer conversation, and
Certainly. Always.
I'll just
Yeah.
name it as such, that I think when people, it's just amazing. Like, I had an experience in this community where I live, that I came in and did an OD, organization development
Mhm.
kind of intervention. I interviewed all the stakeholders, which were everybody, did a whole
Mhm.
stakeholder analysis, and the teachers, the students, the parents, the retirees, like the whole community, and I found out what their needs were, and then I reflected that all back to everybody. This is such a simple. I've done it so many times with so many different systems. That when you actually, rather than getting caught up in fighting, I want
Mhm.
this, I want that, you actually take a systemic approach,
Mhm.
and you find out what the needs are. And lo and behold, a lot of the things that people identified as being needed, they all got fulfilled. There was some, and I'm not saying that always happens, but there is something very powerful about simply being able to, uh, when you name needs, it sets in process their fulfillment.
Yeah, well, what that makes me think of is that within this, communication theory that all of my work is grounded in is this specific model that's called the hierarchy model. A lot of me and a lot of the other people I work with were playing around with calling it the heterarchy model because that flexibility is a really
Mm-hmm.
important piece. So that's a more accurate descriptor to it. But it's talking about these layers of context. And this takes us all the way back to the beginning of the conversation
Mm-hmm.
that both of us are naming something important, that context is not this amorphous blob that hovers over us. There's the context of the day I'm having so far, the context of my family, my peer group, the context of my culture, the context, just to name. And you said there's the context of our, thousands of years of human history and millions of years of world history beyond that. And so there's these different layers that we can, it's not so important to say here's the line between each of them, but just to recognize there are different ones. And that, I think, an important piece of this for me is like choice and trying on new choices to see what gets made. And so when you're talking about speaking the language of needs, I'm thinking about this hierarchy model and how that could be like proactively used as a framework in a conversation to say, hey, there's these different levels that exist right here. Because we are talking about power, we are talking about interests, we are talking about rights, we are talking about needs. But what if we bring the needs to the front? It just gives it that like flexibility and that choice of like, again, this like thought experiment that becomes real of just what if we put needs at the front, what if we prioritized or equally valued this, what you really name this like a feminine informed communicate negotiation. What if we brought these things to the front, then what could we make? And I just think that's, yeah, in this checklist, not checklist, but a bullet pointed list of what you've gone down, if this is what new negotiation means, I can see that like lenses, I would hope being helpful to people, that like each of these things you contain or are possible within our relationships. And so it's about what might it look like if you bring that to the front, your firm, fierce, fair, and unapologetic self. What if you bring that to the front? What if you bring the language of needs to the front? What if you bring our emotional intelligence to the front? What can get made? And I think you name it here, you get it. Obviously, that's so transformative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I had a thought when you were talking about context too. As you can tell, I've been thinking about the indigenous history around here. Um, One of the things that was really interesting is that when the colonists arrived 400 years ago, whatever,
Mhm.
the indigenous, and I've heard this from other indigenous communities, but around here, the colonists would uh, ask one of their representative to be a man, and the indigenous communities, the Wappinger, basically put forward a man, but because they didn't want to put what they describe as their most valuable resource, the woman, the grandmothers,
Interesting.
they wouldn't have sent them forward. But the colonists then interpreted that male representative was in fact the most powerful person. Well, he
Interesting.
wasn't.
Hmm.
And yeah, so that's just such an interesting thing
Yeah.
about
Takes
who,
us back to what does that mean to eat?
the
Yeah.
context,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
who is actually doing the talking,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
what does that mean,
Yes.
um, and
Oh,
then I'll say
so
something else that's on
interesting.
my mind
Please.
about
Yeah.
indigenous life is I've also understood that there are no nouns in so many indigenous languages.
Okay.
They're just verbs. Everything is a verb.
Hmm.
So our world, is in motion. Everything is in
Mm-hmm.
motion, which is really accurate. Like our planet is in motion. And I don't know if I'm getting off track here, but it's just interesting to me. Is that
Yeah.
a noun is a very static idea,
Yeah.
or even for Trump to say "Make America Great Again."
Mm.
I think there's almost an assumption that something is static, or you can. I guess that's more of a regressive idea. You could go
Mm-hmm.
backwards. You could go backwards to a time that was, or something. But I think if everything is in motion, that it seems like that becomes impossible because
Yeah.
everything is moving. And
Mm-hmm.
anyway,
Yeah,
um,
that's taking me to this idea then that's so important within the communication, the reimagination of it all to, again, to traverse the levels of, what I say, our social worlds or our systems. And then our what can feel so, so small, our interpersonal communication, the
mm,
conversation you and I are having right now, the turn by turn, the little moments of what are we making. But there's a relationship
mm,
between those two that in our communication we make our social worlds, we make our realities, and our social
100%.
worlds shape our communication. And so as we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation here, I'm curious. I try to leave it as broad as possible, and I do want to offer you that version of wrapping up in terms of just saying what else, like what do you want to leave people with. But if you'd be okay taking a little more direction from me, I'm wondering if there is any experience you've had or story that's coming to mind that you could frame in terms of that relationship and the things you've just shared about new negotiation, about when you have shared new negotiation, when you've invited people into this new way of being. What have you seen get made in the social world? And if have a story that extends this far enough, then how have you seen that new social world shape? Is there a story I'm wondering you could leave us with that speaks to that like co-creative relationship of when people have this new negotiation, what gets made?
mm,
And then when that is made, what gets made, and what, like just the ongoing transformation
mhm.
that this can cause, that helps us to appreciate that, yes, it may feel small because it's about you and me talking together. It's about how we make decisions in our families, in our offices, in our daily lives, but it's bigger than that. So do with that what you will, I'd like to say to you.
Well, this is a a little bit like what's coming to mind is like gardening. When the person who sometimes when she comes, I have somebody who sometimes helps me garden. I do a lot of it myself, but and sometimes it can be even hard to see what she did. But I mean, I can see it because I pay attention to the garden. But,
Yeah.
my ex-husband would always say, "What the hell did she do?" and
Yeah.
but this is on the daily. This is something that is happening all the time.
Yeah, right.
And so I will tell a story of with about that is with my partner. Not that long ago, he got somebody new living in his house, and he needed. We don't live together, and he really needs the rent, and the room is right off of the kitchen. And I came into the kitchen and I forgot that the guy was there, and I was speaking kind of loud. And my partner said, very, very intensely, he's a really lovely person. I mean, this person, I love this guy very much. But he said to me with intensity and harshness, "Don't talk," under his breath, "Do not talk so loud like this." Just said it with a lot of velocity, but soft. And I could feel myself immediately going into a trigger mode.
Mm-hmm.
But because I've done this work for so long and dealt with so many people in conflict and some intense, I know the trigger mode, and I know when my heart is racing, and I know not to respond in that moment. Mm-hmm. I know about containment and the power of containment. And I will say also I love the work of Terry Real. His work and my work, I feel like if I could be so bold to say, is very aligned in this regard. And I'm going to quote Terry because anyway, I waited because I know to wait until, and I also felt like I got my cues I had a dog for a long time. And I really noticed with my dog how when she was kind of pretty fierce dog, also a puppy dog, but she was also very fierce, that she would mix it up with other dogs. And I really learned that to not do anything until her hackles literally came down. Literally, you could see her hackles rise, and they literally came down. Well, the same thing with managing myself. Yes. I was waiting for my trigger to calm down, because I do believe that triggers are very valuable information, and it's up to us to manage them. Mm-hmm. So I waited. I don't know how long I waited. It might have been 20 minutes. It was something like 20 minutes, half an hour or something. But then I felt myself like I was back in my functional adult. I was, and I went into where he was, and I said, something like, there is nothing that you can say with harshness that loving kindness can't do better. And that actually is a line I heard from Terry long ago, but I like the line. Wow. And he completely, to my partners, he's so not he just immediately, we didn't say another word about it. And then that situation never reciprocated. It just, I learned, he learned. It was a learning conversation rather than a power over conversation. So, that's a micro thing, but those micro things are happening all the time. Where one person says something, they say it in a very attacking, and I have a whole model in my book, Attack, Evade, Inform, Open, and Unite. But, when you, that really goes right back to, some of the mob bosses that have informed Donald Trump's communication style. But I think the more all of us are like very good at managing ourselves and managing those kind of triggers, those micro conversations, they can turn into wars, and they can turn into creative communication that then moves us forward. And so I guess my hope is that, I certainly, like, that's not something that I do every day, but I'm pretty damn good at it at this point, I will say. I lose it sometimes, but mostly I'm very, it's pretty much ingrained in me how to, and it pays off. It pays off in all kinds of ways, in money negotiations, in interpersonal relationships, pretty much every aspect of life. And then, of course, all the mediation I've done with some pretty intense conflict situations. Sometimes it's harder to deal with one's own issues than to
Yeah.
facilitate other people's issues as a mediator, you know?
Mhm.
It's
Absolutely.
so anyway, I
Yeah.
hope that's kind of
Absolutely.
a story.
Yeah. It is. Will you say those words from Terry one more time? There's nothing that hate can say. Is that what you said?
There's nothing that harshness can
Harshness.
achieve that loving kindness can't do better.
There's nothing that harshness can achieve that loving kindness can't do better.
I think that's,
I
I don't
hope,
know. If,
I
you know.
think that's perfect. Like I kind of like don't want to say anymore. I think that's what I want to leave people with. And
Mhm.
again, going back to that, myself of, oh, I heard that quote. And then I was able to think of, well, what if that's true? I'm hoping that's what people feel as they're walking away from this conversation. If they hold that in their mind, there is nothing that harshness can say that loving kindness can't do better. What if that was true?
Mhm. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's really beautiful. So, Susan,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time and your perspective and your insights today.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even think I got to name that well, I think right at the beginning, but I hope people will go read your book, and then also listen to your podcast, because
Mm-hmm.
the second this ends, I've got my pre-recorded little outro. People are going to hear my voice say, just because the episode ends doesn't mean the conversation does. And I think that's always true. And I think you're embodying that by saying, just because I've written this book doesn't mean that's the final word. You're following it up with this podcast and these expansive conversations. So I just am glad to see that out in the world. So I hope people will find you that way. And just I am sending so much gratitude to you for this conversation, Susan, through my computer, right to you.
Right. Thank you, Abby. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it too. Okay, that is all for today's episode. But remember, the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. There are so many ways to stay in dialogue. You can email questions, reflections, ideas, and stories to storieslived.storiestold@gmail.com for a chance to be featured in an episode. You can comment on our Instagram at Stories Lived, Stories Told Pod, or the CMM Institute YouTube page to engage with other listeners. And you can subscribe to the CMM Institute Substack to make sure you're getting every episode right in your inbox. Links to all these places can be found in the show notes for this episode. Other ways you can support this podcast are by following, rating, and reviewing the show wherever you listen. Plus, please share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation. Stories Lived, Stories Told is an initiative of the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution, an organization dedicated to furthering the coordinated management of meaning theory and practice of communication. More information about CMM can be found at cmminstitute.substack.com. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abby, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.